What are we discussing on today's Locked On Diamondbacks podcast? Things we despise from the first half of the season and some predictions for the second half.
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Listening to who? Always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas, multimedia journalist and graphic designer. So please go check out my website, MillardThomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. If you want to see more content by me, please follow me on Twitter at CareerThomas24 for my personal account, Millard.Thomas123 for my personal account on Instagram, or look up Locked On Diamondbacks on both Twitter and Instagram for the podcast handle. Today's episode is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Check out Booking.com for your stay today. On today's Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, we'll talk about things that we did not like from the first half of the season. If the D-backs turn around a few of these things, they will go on a run in the second half. And I will give you some predictions for the second half of the season. A lot of them are rooted in the FanDuel odds. We got some evidence to support our claim. So we got a jam-packed pod for you guys as always. Thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms. So please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked On Diamondbacks on YouTube. All right. Let's get into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Let's discuss things that we hated from the first half of the season. I have 6 things written down. Again, it's not a power ranking. These are the things that I despise the most from the first half of the D-back season. And some of these things are obvious. Some of these things are stuff that we've discussed on the podcast a lot this year. And I'm going to start off with the thing that I think every D-backs fan has been most disappointed by this season, and that is the sophomore slump for Corbin Carroll. Corbin Carroll this season has just not looked like the player that he was last year, and there's so many reasons that you can use. Is it the swing? Has it become more flat, not producing, enough lift on it, a lot of ground balls? Is it just like overall confidence? Like, what is it with Corbin Carroll this season that has led him to have such a downright disappointing year, and especially coming off a year where he was so incredible, right? Winning Rookie of the Year, first player in Major League history as a rookie, 25 home runs, 50 stolen bases. He was incredible last year. Defensively, offensively, he did everything. And of course, in the postseason, Corbin Carroll, super important, those first 2 rounds of the postseason. Carroll was the D-backs most dynamic player last year. I still believe he's the D-backs most dynamic player. Is there a player on the D-backs in terms of their ceiling being higher than Corbin Carroll's? When you talk about power, when you talk about speed, overall hitting ability, defense, Corbin Carroll is a guy that can check so many boxes for you as a superstar. And so far this season, it's been super disappointing. If you go by WRC+, Corbin Carroll is the 10th worst player in the National League. It has not been a good season at all for Corbin Carroll from an offensive standpoint, and he needs to wake up big time in the second half of the season. A lot of these things that we're talking about, most disappointed by from the first half, if half of these things turn around in the second half of the season, the D-backs are going to be hard to contend with. Imagine if you got the D-backs from June 29th on, continue that into the second half, then all of a sudden Corbin Carroll starts contributing to your team as well, and he looks like 2023 Corbin Carroll. This D-backs offense can go to an even another level, which is crazy because they ended the first half of the season number 1 in runs scored, and that's with Carroll having a down season and not being the most dynamic player in this D-backs lineup. If Carroll can get 85% back of where he was in 2023, watch out for this D-backs offense in the second half of the season. How about this one? How about Eugenio Suarez not even being an offensive upgrade over Evan Longoria last year? I will say defensively, I like Suarez a lot. I think he makes a lot of plays. Maybe he's not as rangy as some other third basemen, but I feel like if he gets his hands on the ball, he's going to make the play. His arm is so deadly accurate and strong. I trust Suarez a lot from a defensive perspective. But offensively, outside what he's done in July, because he's been really good in July, when you take into account the full first half of the season for Eugenio Suarez, it has not been better than the first half of the season offensively that Evan Longoria gave the D-backs last year. Because right now, Eugenio Suarez, when you look at the numbers, 216 average, 668 OPS, 10 home runs, 48 ribbies. When you signed Eugenio Suarez, you said, I'll take the strikeouts. That's fine. We know he's going to strike out a ton, but as long as he provides the pop, some RBI production, we will take the strikeouts. And little did you know, not little did you know. Fun fact, Eugenio Suarez does lead the team in strikeouts, but he's actually tied with someone else, Christian Walker, 106 strikeouts. Christian Walker is on pace to destroy his season high in strikeouts. Not too sure why Christian Walker has struck out so much this season. A lot of the other numbers are really good for Christian Walker, but career high strikeout percentage right now. He's striking out at a very high rate, but still not higher than the rate that Eugenio Suarez is striking out. When you consider the rest of the numbers for Eugenio Suarez, has not been a very productive first half. And again, comparing it to Evan Longoria, who had more home runs than Suarez had last year. And don't forget, Evan Longoria missed half of the first half of the season due to injury. So in 47 games, Evan Longoria had 11 home runs. Eugenio Suarez has 10 home runs in 93 games. Longo had also a 828 OPS in those 47 games. From an offensive standpoint, Longo was making an impact and doing exactly what the D-backs needed when they signed him. Suarez this year has not. If he had the 106 strikeouts with the 30% strikeout rate, we wouldn't care if he also had like 16, 17 home runs at the break with maybe the same amount of RBIs. I actually think 48 RBIs is fine, but if he had the 48 RBIs mixed with like 17 home runs, then I think you would be okay with that strikeout total and that really low slash line. But we have not seen that from Eugenio. But what we have seen since June 29th turned his entire season around. So if he can continue to do anywhere close to what he's done since June 29th, Eugenio Suarez in the second half of the season could be an impact player for the D-backs. And then the final thing I want to discuss in segment number 1 is Zach Gallen. Is it rust or is it something else? He has looked weird in his last few starts since coming off the injured list. He dominated the Oakland A's, where, again, it's the Oakland A's. You don't want to put a ton of stock in that kind of start where you go against that kind of offense. But since then, hasn't really been a very effective Zach Gallen. 3 earned runs, 4 innings against the Dodgers, 4 earned runs, 5.1 innings against the Braves, then 6 earned runs, 3.2 innings against the Blue Jays. Every start got worse July 4th on. And I want to know, is that rust or is it something else for Zach Gallen? Because we know in the second half of 2023, Zach Gallen did not look like himself. The first half, he dominated last season, started the All-Star game, of course, but definitely fell off in the second half of the season, and it parlayed into the postseason where he was shaky at times. Throughout most of this regular season, he was very good, but when you kind of go through the game log for Zach Gallen, I wouldn't say there's a lot of dominant starts. Even his best starts, where he has 2 starts this season where he struck out 10. One of them, he went only 5 innings, 3 earned runs, 8 hits. The other start where he struck out 10, he pitched into the 7th, but again, 3 earned runs, 7 hits. Like, I don't think there's been a lot of dominant starts under Zach Gallen's belt this season, and we need him to get back to that level of dominance that we saw the second half of 2022, the first half of 2023. The D-backs want a real shot at another World Series appearance in the second half of this season. Now we'll continue to discuss things that we dislike from the first half of the D-back season in segment number 2. But hey, if you're looking for a place to stay, I suggest using Booking.com. Yeah, because with summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games, it's time to explore those US cities you always secretly want to learn more about. Yes, we're talking about your rival cities, with hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on booking.com. You might just find your perfect stay even in your baseball rival city. From hotels that look over stadiums to family friendly resorts, booking.com has so many choices across the US for your summer travel this MLB season. I can't lie, I love going up to San Diego and checking out Petco Park when the D-backs are playing because it's beautiful. And I love the city. And if you want to find your perfect stay like I did, I suggest booking.com. The right stay can make you a fan of any US city, even your rivals. Book today on booking.com, on the site, or in the booking.com app. And also, I suggest using my favorite daily fantasy sports app if you like that kind of thing, because Prize Picks is America's number one daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Like other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stats projections and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into 1,000. Prize Picks is available in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right. Let's get back to the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast and let's discuss some other things we were really disappointed by in the first half of the D-back season. I think the other big thing we have to discuss is injuries to the rotation and maybe just injuries overall, because the D-backs have been snake bitten this season. When you think about all the injuries that they've dealt with, I'm going to talk about the rotation in a second, but even the lineup, right? A guy like Geraldo Perdomo, how he's been able to set a tone for the D-backs all season last year. As soon as we come into 2024, he gets hurt pretty immediately into the year, and we're down him for a couple months. And you could see the offense take a hit. You didn't have that guy in the number 9 hole that was great with plate discipline, a real tone setter, also clutch, and a great locker room guy. You're missing him, a glue guy in your clubhouse, and Perdomo going down definitely hurt the D-backs. Also, Alec Thomas. I mean, he was the starting center fielder for most of the D-back season last year. We know we could do defensively, and I may not like him as an everyday player, but I can't deny he comes through in clutch situations, and that was another guy the D-backs are missing for most of this season. And then you look at the pitching staff, and it has been destroyed by injuries this year. The D-backs ace, Zach Gallen, he has made 15 starts, but only 76 innings pitched compared to 113 for Brandon Pfaadt. Zach Gallen has the less innings pitched than Ryan Nelson this season. And just think about that. Gallen has been on and off the injured list with hamstring issues this year, has not been able to finish starts, and has definitely hurt his consistency and rhythm this year. And he's the D-backs ace. And if he's not pitching well, like, what can you expect from the other guys? Look at Jordan Montgomery. We'll talk about him later, but he's currently on the injured list. He missed the start of the season because he had to work his way into shape. Still waiting for that. And now he's currently hurt through the All-Star break. Should be expected to start right after the All-Star break, most likely, but we'll see what happens with him. You also have, who else am I missing? Oh, Erod, of course, hasn't made a start all season. My brain went blank for a second. Erod hasn't made a start all season for the D-backs. At the time of us signing Erod, we knew the downside of him was his health. It was always a possibility that he was going to get hurt, but we thought maybe he would start a few games first before the injuries, came in. But no, right away, Erod got hurt and has yet to make a start for the D-backs and potentially won't make one until late August. Like, we might look up and it's like, okay, Erod has to make 5 starts before we get to the postseason. Like, can you really trust him as a postseason rotation guy at that point? Like, maybe as a number 5 starter, but once you get deep into the postseason, assuming the D-backs are there, like, yeah, Erod is probably going to have to come out the bullpen if he barely makes any starts at the end of the regular season, unless he's just way better than Jordan Montgomery in those 5 or 6 starts he has when he comes back from injury. And then also Merrill Kelly, Mr. D-back, Mr. Arizona, as he went to Arizona State. Everyone loves Merrill Kelly. Tough guy, hard on the sleeve, right? Emotional warrior. And he's barely been able to pitch this season for the D-backs due to injury as well. He made only 4 starts, and he was dominant in those 4 starts. 6 earned runs, 24 innings pitched, 2.19 ERA, sub-1 whip. Like, Merrill Kelly, again, was going to have a fantastic season where he should have finished top 10 in Cy Young voting and would have been shafted, of course, because other people don't recognize the talents of Merrill Kelly, but that's okay. But now he's on the injured list and might not return until a guy like Erod also returns. Both of those guys are dealing with injuries that are going to keep them out until August. And right now, this entire rotation, even Brandon Pfaadt didn't go on the injured list, but left to start early because he got hit in the ankle. And he was, had that thing swell up probably for a day before he came back. So you look at the whole rotation. Maybe Pfaadt didn't land on the injury list, but at some point, the entire starting rotation has been hurt for the D-backs. 2 guys are currently on the IL. 3 guys are currently on the IL. The other guy just came back and hasn't looked good since then. Pfaadt is currently the best D-backs rotation member. He's the guy I have the most trust in, and it's crazy to say. But when talking about things that we hated from the first half of the season that they turn around the second half, could definitely boost the D-back chances of going to another World Series. This could be number 1 on the list. If the D-backs rotation gets healthy the second half of the season and you're throwing out Gallen, Kelly, Monty, Erod, and Pfaadt, and maybe 3 of the 5 look really good, maybe 4 of the 5 look really good, you could see why the D-backs have a legit chance of getting back to another World Series if their rotation can get back to form, get healthy, and actually be productive. And then speaking of the rotation, the other thing that I dislike from the first half of the season is Jordan Montgomery looking like Madison Bumgarner 2.0 because Monty has been terrible this season for the D-backs. He seems out of shape. He seems thick, and he has not been effective. Jordan Montgomery right now, his numbers are not looking good. 6.44 ERA. 65 innings pitched, 47 earned runs. And you look at the whip for Monty, 1.675, almost 12 hits per 9 innings, and he's striking out at a very low rate. The biggest issue for Monty right now, it was the same issue that Mad Bum had when he came to the D-backs. He has no velo on his pitches. Last year, Monty was throwing like a career high in his sinker ball. 93.2 miles per hour is what his sinker ball average. This season, he's down to like 91.5 miles per hour. When you have that big of a dip, it's going to make a difference on your game. And right now, Monty is getting hit so hard when he throws that sinker ball. And it is definitely very obvious to see that he is just not looking like the best version of himself, and not the guy that we saw during the postseason run and the guy that we saw in the World Series. If the D-backs can get that 2023 Jordan Montgomery, like that guy is a legit frontline starter, number 2, number 3 guy in your rotation. We saw him be the best starting pitcher, arguably, on a World Series team last year. So we know what his ceiling can be. Right now, he's a bust, but still a lot of time to turn his season around. Then the final thing that I despised from the first half of the season was shaky Paul Sewald. For most of the season, he was very good, but as soon as July flipped, I don't know what happened to Paul Sewald. 3 straight save opportunities where he blew it, and now the fan base is a little shaky in a Paul Sewald. His final numbers from the first half still look solid. 3.38 ERA, 13 saves, but we can definitely see with his pitches right now, his fastball, it elevates and then it moves a little bit and it just kind of sits in that upper middle part of the zone at 91 miles per hour. If you're a power guy, it feels like you could tee off on it at any time. And for Sewald, I want to have confidence in him. I want to have trust in him. I believe he can still be the D-backs closer for the rest of this season, but he needs to either add a little bit more velo on his pitches, get a little bit more movement, or really work his secondary pitches, because right now for Paul Sewald. He seems a little bit too predictable, and it seems like opposing hitters are keying in on what he's doing. But I still have trust and I still have confidence that he can turn it around and still be the D-backs closer in the second half of the season. Now, I got some predictions I want to discuss for the second half of the season for the D-backs. But first, I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to fanduel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right. Let's get back to the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Let's give some predictions for the second half of the D-backs season. First one, I believe Brandon Pfaadt is going to finish top 10 in Cy Young voting. And right now, this could be considered a very hot take because right now, the numbers and the odds makers are telling you Brandon Pfaadt is clearly on the outside looking in when it comes to top 10 in Cy Young voting. He is nowhere near the odds right now to potentially win the Cy Young this season. He's not really on anyone's radar. And even statistically, it's not exactly the resume of someone that you would say is going to garner a lot of Cy Young votes at the end of the season. But this is me more making a bet on Brandon Pfaadt taking another step forward in the second half of the season because I believe there's been so many games this year where he's flashed his dominance, where he's pitched 6-7 innings, but maybe he has one bad pitch, a couple bad pitches where he gives up a long home run, or it's 2 outs and it's, you got 2 outs in the 7th inning, and then all of a sudden back-to-back walks and he gives up a double, and now all of a sudden he's given up 4 earned runs on the day and his ERA balloons just a little bit. I think there's been a lot of starts this year where he's looked good, dominant 5-6 innings, and all of a sudden it falls apart in just 1 inning. Brandon Pfaadt, I believe, can still emerge in the second half of the season and continue to get better. I don't think the first half of Pfaadt is what we're going to see in the second half. I think he's going to get better. And right now, statistically, he's right outside or borderline top 10 in a bunch of stats, top 10 in innings pitched and walks per 9, 11th in FIP, 19th in ERA. I just believe there's a path where he can really come on strong in the second half of the season. And if he does that, he can definitely garner some Cy Young votes. I also believe it's a bet on some of the other Cy Young candidates potentially falling out the race. Guy like Tyler Glass now, Ranger Suarez, are they hitting some walls potentially? Like, that's why I like Brandon Pfaadt, a young guy. I think he's only going to get better as the season progresses, and he's someone that I would like to bet on to finish top 10 in the Cy Young voting in the second half of the season. How about this one? Another prediction. And this is courtesy of FanDuel. Christian Walker over 33.5 home runs. That is the line for Christian Walker on FanDuel right now. I believe he's going to hit over that number. I think Christian Walker this season is going to finish with a career high in home runs. Right now, his career high, I believe, is 36. I think he could hit at least 38 this season. And it's only minus 113 if you think he can hit the over on 33.5 home runs. He hit 33 home runs last season. He hit 36 the year before. Christian Walker, at the halfway point, already has 22 home runs. And in the second half last season, his home run rate stayed the same post All-Star break, kept up the power swing. So just because he hit a lot in the first half this season doesn't mean all of a sudden he's going to slow down in the second half. Christian Walker historically has kept up his home run rate in the second half of the season. The only issue is no more games at Dodger Stadium, and that is where he has absolutely dominated the season. So is going to need to have a few more big games at Chase Field for this prop bet to hit, because he's got no more games in LA, unfortunately, for Christian Walker. But I love the over on 33.5 home runs. How about this one? I believe Ketel Marte can finish top 5 in MVP voting. I do think it's going to be tough because I think the NL field, I think there's 10 guys that you can definitely make an argument for at least being in the top 5 of voting. I think there's like 3 or 4 clear guys who are tier one, even above a Ketel Marte. I think Ketel Marte is one of the top names in that tier two of MVP candidates, but being at the top of the tier two means you can finish fifth in MVP voting because I think Otani, Freddie, Marcell Ozuna, and then there's like one other guy I'm missing in terms of MLB futures odds that people really like right now. But after those guys, I think Ketel Marte is right there, deserves to be fifth in the NL MVP voting. Right now, when you look at the odds for FanDuel, Otani's one, Harper two, Freeman three, Ozuna four. And I think that's clearly the top four with Ketel Marte right after that in the FanDuel odds. And I think that's perfectly fine for Ketel Marte to finish fifth in MVP voting. I think that would be a fantastic season. He finished fourth in 2019 in MVP voting. I think back to being the best second baseman in baseball, finishing fifth in MVP voting would be a great marker on his resume. He's currently fifth in home runs in the National League, fifth in WRC plus among all players with at least 90 games played in the NL. He's also fifth in odds at plus 4,500, tied with Francisco Lindor on FanDuel. Ketel Marte is a true two-way player, offensively, defensively, and that's why I believe you can finish top five in MVP voting once we get to the second half. And then finally, my final prediction for the D-backs in the second half of the season, I believe they will make the playoffs. Again, it's a bet on the D-backs team continuing to play well like we saw them finish in the first half of the season, the rotation getting healthy, and also I just don't buy the stock of the other teams in the wild card race like I do with the D-backs. I know that probably makes me a little bit of a homer, but if I'm matching up the D-backs versus the Mets, like I think the D-backs clearly have more talent than the Mets. I think they clearly have more talent than the St. Louis Cardinals. The San Diego Padres, I would say it's a little bit more of a toss-up, but Pittsburgh Pirates, San Francisco Giants, like I think the D-backs from a talent perspective just clear most of the teams in the National League. And that's why I believe they will make the playoffs. And at plus 138, I think that's free money that FanDuel is giving away. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.